Okay, so right now we're going to start with making our brownie batter. So I have all my mise en place ready. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to melt my butter. I like to add a little bit of coffee or instant coffee into my recipe. I find that combination of coffee and chocolate really work well together. So what I'm doing right now is I've added it to my warmed butter. And I'm just stirring it just to get it dissolved. I don't want to add straight coffee into my recipe because that liquid will throw off the recipe. So what I'm doing here is just melting it in this liquid instead of water. I'm melting it into the hot butter. Okay. So my next step, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my hot butter and I'm going to pour it into my chocolate mixture. I'm going to allow that to sit on the chocolate and allow the chocolate to kind of pick up the heat of that melted butter. And then in a few moments, after I prepare my next step, I'll come back to this and I will stir it up. Okay, so our next step is going to involve taking two different sugars. So we're going to use white granulated sugar. We're going to also use some light brown sugar. I'm going to incorporate that in together. So our next step here is we are going to now add in our eggs. So I've taken my eggs and my vanilla. I'm going to put that into my mixture. And I'm going to start to break up the egg yolks. Start to stir it in. And I'm not really looking to incorporate too much air. I'm really just looking to break down the sugar, break down any lumps that might be in there, and to incorporate the eggs. On that side, I'm going to now take my flour, and I'm going to add in half a teaspoon of salt. I'm going to make sure that I just mix that up and lighten up the flour. So now I have my flour mixture, I have my egg and my sugar mixture, and I'm going to come on back to this chocolate mixture. And now that the chocolate is warmed, I'm going to start to stir it up so that I get a nice smooth batter. And ideally we don't want to have to go back to any heat with this. The heat of the butter should have melted the chocolate, but if you did need to and you were still in the pan, you could simply just put that pan back on the stove for about 5 seconds. Now that I'm in a plastic container, if I needed to, I could put this into the microwave for about 10-15 second increments until everything is melted. Alright, so here we are now getting ready to incorporate our next ingredients. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to get all of my melted chocolate and butter mixture. I want to get that into my eggs. And at this point, the mixing process has actually cooled the butter and the butter and the chocolate down, so it won't cook my eggs. A rubber spatula here, make sure I get everything out, right? Chocolate and butter are super expensive ingredients. And as one of our former colleagues used to always say to the kids, get the money out. Here in this situation, when you're running a business, you want to make sure that every ounce of your product gets into the final mix. Alright, so I'm going to go back to just mixing this. Again, I'm not looking to incorporating air. Just want to make sure that I get everything incorporated together. And at this point, once it is all together, I can go ahead, I can see it's getting thicker now that that moisture has been added to the chocolate. Now I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to add my flour in. I'm going to add in about half the flour first so that I can mix it in nice and evenly. Actually, I'm going to switch my mixing utensils. Because I want to be folding, I'm going to use a rubber spatula. But I don't want to overdevelop the gluten, so I need to make sure that I am folding. Scraping out the sides and folding everything in. next batch. Stirring it until I no longer see any dryness. Insert in there. Some lumps of flour. And now my next step is going to be moving into my prepared baking dish. My prepared baking dish is a quarter sheet pan for the size recipe that has been sprayed with baking spray, and then I simply press in parchment paper. Once this is baked, the parchment paper will stick to the bottom of the brownie so that when I go to invert it out of the pan to cut it, it will help lift out of the pan. So now I'm going to take my ingredients. Now that I've gotten all the batter out of the bowl, the next step I'm going to use an offset spatula. So the offset spatula you're looking for should have a nice handle to it. Offset meaning, I don't know if you can see it here, meaning that there's a dip down before it goes straight across, so that will allow you to spread this nice and evenly. What you also may notice is that I have my quarter sheet pan sitting on top of a half sheet pan. And really the only reason why I do this is because I don't want to have any mess in my oven. So if for some reason I overfilled the pan or something happened during the baking process, this would catch anything that would flow over the top. Okay, there we go. So now make sure the batter is nice and even. Clean up my sides so I don't have any extra batter baked there. And now this is going to go into the oven. It's going to bake for about 30 to 35 minutes at 325 degrees. What I'm looking for is for the center, I'm looking for a nice shine over it. I'm looking that when I tap into the center, it feels like a sponge. And halfway through the baking process, I'm actually going to rotate the pan in the oven. And the reason being is because we don't want to have any hot spots that overcook any one part of this. All right, so here we are. Our recipe has now baked for about 30 minutes. Halfway through the baking process, I did take it out and turn it, rotate it, and I switched the pan from the bottom to the top just to make sure that it has nice even baking time. So what I'm looking for is I'm looking to see all these nice, really thin, crispy kind of like layers on the top, and I'm just going to slightly tap it, and if it feels like it is bouncing back, almost like it is very spongy, then I know that it is ready to come out of the oven. Alright, so now we're on the last step of our brownies. After I bake the brownies, I allow them to cool. I'd like to generally put them either in the refrigerator or the freezer so they firm up before I go to cut them. Makes it a lot easier. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use my bench scraper, or you can use a paring knife, whatever works easiest for you. And I'm going to gently press down the side of the pan just to start working on releasing the brownies. Oh, there you go. To gently release the brownies from the pan. So now once my brownies are out, I'm going to very simply take this, flip it over. And now my brownies are inverted. And if you remember, we put parchment paper onto our sheet pan prior to baking, so that was going to help with the release of the brownies from the pan. And you want to just carefully pull all the parchment paper off. So now your brownies have been released from the pan. We're going to flip it back over and we're going to work on cutting it. So I can do a couple simple things. I'm going to use a knife. So I have a nice long chef knife that I'm going to use. I also have this very handy little expanding cutter set. So I can set it to the size I want, lock it into place, and then it allows me to make my marks prior to cutting. Or I can simply just use a knife and a ruler. So I generally like to start by cutting the long way. And so here I'm going to do, this cuts 6. So I'm going to actually do 4 by 6 and I'll get 24 out of this. Now because my brownies bake nice and even and they're nice and flat all the way across, I can actually utilize the whole brownie. If I felt that I needed to cut the edges, I would have worked on trimming the edges prior to, but these brownies look really great. So I have this all lined up, so I'm going to get 4 cuts. And what I'm going to do with this is I'm just marking it with this tool. So that allows me to get nice straight even cuts. I'll switch to my knife, and now what I'll do is I will insert this down, I'll press, lift, and then a second. So now I have a nice even cut. If I found that I had a lot of buildup of brownie on my knife, I would dip it in hot water or wipe it off with a nice clean towel. What happens is when you slice anything and you have buildup of product, when you go to cut the next row, it just will lay itself on top of the next cut, and then we don't get a nice beautiful finish. Okay, so there's our 4. Now we're going to go by 6. So again, I'm going to open up my cutters here. Just because I'm choosing the 4x6, it's just easier. If I wanted to make them smaller, if I wanted to make small bite-sized ones, I would obviously do a different size. But I think these give us a nice square. So again, I made my mark, and then now, if I want to do it a little faster, slice down. Following those lines. So that, in the end now, is my brownie. I have some nice squares there. If I really wanted to take this and I was doing a big platter, I might actually take these guys and cut them into triangles. And this way then they become nice, like 2-bite portions. Right, so if I was doing a platter, or if I was doing a mixture of cookies and brownies on a plate, do this, right, and this way then I could just do a nice presentation. Okay. I can take just my brownies like this, and I can just line them up straight. If I wanted to, another trick that I could also do, I could actually take some chocolate ganache, do a thin layer of ganache on the top. Maybe at that point, if I want to add in any toasted, maybe walnuts or almonds. There's really a lot of things you can do at this point. You can take powdered sugar and sugar at the top. A lot of different options, but in the end, you can have a nice bite-sized brownie. The other thing that I can also do is that I can take these items now and I can wrap them and freeze them. I also have additional quarter sheet pans that I had made earlier, so I can freeze those whole and then cut them when I need them. So this is a good way to make some desserts and some sweet treats for the holidays or any special occasion, and to get ahead of your production. So just keep that in mind. These if you wrap them with 2 layers of saran wrap, you get easily about 6 months in the freezer. So always good ways to think about how do I make all of my baked goods in advance. And that is one simple way. Hope you enjoyed the demo.